And you know, this strand of literature is reappearing now in full force because of Syria. This was the sort of line of argument that was proposed in interpreting Syrian politics. And it was essentially that we should not be surprised at Assad's rule. We should not be surprised at Baathism, because basically this is just a kind of a veneer at the top of a built-in authoritarian system, which is patriarchal, which is, has great disparities of wealth, which is not redressing the sort of social questions. And the argument about that is that, yeah, didn't we have a little bit of an Arab Spring in the early days, the Syrian Spring of Bashar al-Assad? Yes, we did. Did we not, under his father, have a brief moment of apparent liberalization? Yes, we did. That is to say, he allowed private enterprise to some extent. The state kind of retrenched a little bit from the economy. Some people argue, maybe this is the beginning of a curbing of the authoritarianism. But in fact, this school of thought will say, quite to the contrary. He just reinvented authoritarianism. The way you solidify your authoritarianism is to make some concessions, is to grant a few things. And you know, this has given rise to the school of thought called resilient authoritarianism. So it's again kind of a step removed from what I started with, that it's endemic in the political culture. This school of thought would say, it may be, but it's more structural. It's more that these guys are narrowly based, that they're controlling the economy. And what they do is they just simply adapt themselves to the new circumstances, always, always to protect their own power. So there is resilient authoritarianism built into the nature of that politics. It's kind of what drives the politics. You know, it's an interesting thing. One other term they use, by the way, you know, they sound so odd and so tragic in a way now that we see what's happening on the ground in Syria. This school of thought called it upgrading authoritarianism. Upgrading it. It just, you know, better PR, more efficient authoritarianism. So we have, you know, we have a pretty strong view here of what is the case. And I give just one more example, but just very briefly. There's a kind of maybe a postmodernist sort of school here. Beatrice Ibu, for example, on her work on Tunisia. I would call it kind of everyday authoritarianism. Her argument is, it's not so much political culture, it's not so much structural factors like political economy and the narrowness of the regime. It's really got to do with the numerous daily decisions that people make and the way the system is kind of organized. So for example, for her, it would be things like, look at the taxi drivers. The taxi drivers are heavily controlled. They're spying on their customers. They must report on what their customers are saying in the taxis. This, you know, this is a kind of an everyday occurrence. But that is what kept Ben Ali going. That one. Another one is the whole nature of how do you pay off your debts? Who gets credit? And her argument was that it's a system which didn't necessarily torture you, didn't necessarily send you to prison. What it did is, it took your job away and it devalued your academic credentials. And it said, you can't get a job. You won't get a job. And in that way, controls you. So, you know, it's a powerful argument. So all of these put together, I think in a way, are the received wisdom about how we would approach the study of politics in the Muslim world. So what does it say? It says that religion is really not so important as part of political life, that authoritarianism is ingrained and endemic, that if religion is important in some ways, it's in support of authoritarianism. It's a kind of supporting role, as it were. And so I guess let me just summarize it by saying this. Politics is seen as, in a structural, coercive way. Religion is seen as secondary, if not marginal. And I think that's the intellectual context with which we have to start the discussion of Islamic politics. So there's no true field here. The field is rife with assumptions. Okay, that's part one. Let me move into my second part of this lecture. So the second part of the lecture really is, does Islam really have anything to say about politics? What do we know? What's going on here? Does it prescribe a particular form of politics? Does it prescribe a kind of political recipe, as it were? So let me nail my colors to the mast here and say straight out, to me, here we have the invention of traditions. I know this is not the way it would be presented by many Muslims. I know this is not the way it would be argued in parts of the Muslim world. My view is this, that basically we have political thought, insofar as we know it, is really a modern contrivance. It is a reaction to the political circumstances of the day. What's the most important in many ways, particularly, and I guess here mainly talking about Sunni thought, and if you really want to question me, we can talk about Shiism, but essentially I'm talking about Sunni thought. So what do we have here? What's the most important thing going on in the 20th century? The abolition of the caliphate in 1924. You know the story. You know that it is one of the motivating factors behind the formation of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. But that should tell us, that's symptomatic of the larger sort of intellectual ferment that went on from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, etc. And essentially the question was, how do we replace the caliphate? What do we have as the organizing political principle of our lives? And in a sense, this is where we begin to see this great, great emphasis on the Islamic State. But the Islamic State is an invented concept. And I know this is controversial. I know we can debate this about alternative, that there are the Constitution of Medina, there are many, many early examples in Islam that many people point to as the template for a state. My point is that that's part of the production of modern thought, modern knowledge, in a sense. So, to my mind, it is a reaction to these events, and we have the presumption that Islam therefore prescribes a political solution. We know that that's the slogan of the Muslim Brotherhood. Islam is the answer. Islam is the solution. So we know that the idea is that there should be something which will replace what we've got. The trouble is that if you start again unpacking this, what we see is incredible variation, incredible differences of view on this. And just to give you a sort of a broad idea of this, we have, for the sake of it, let's put in the three schools of thought. We have the Islamists, okay? So the Islamists say the modern state is accepted, but essentially it should be Islamized. Muslim Brotherhood. The state is a necessary institution, but in a way what really matters is the Islamic state. Hizb ut-Tahrir. Second school of thought, secularists, opposite. State and religion must be separated. Islam doesn't prescribe a state. In fact, unity is the recipe for political tyranny. If you have the unity of religion and state, you will have political tyranny. Ali Abdul Rasid, many, you can talk about Khalid Muhammad Khalid, you have various examples here. Reformists, third school of thought, somewhere in between. Religion and politics are interconnected, but the domination of the state is not such a good thing. Domination of the state can be harmful, can be anti-democratic. So it's not so important, these schools of thought. You might come up with 5 more. It doesn't make any difference. My point is a spectrum of thought, that there isn't one answer to the question of who should have ultimate Islamic authority. How should the political community of Islam be organized? And if you just kind of look at kind of basic building blocks of a political theory, you could find so many different answers. If I say, what do we need? Well, we need something about authority. We need something about leadership. We need something about the nature of the community. We need something about the law. Where does it fit in terms of a society? So if you take any of those, you have a huge debate. Anything, Where does authority lie? Authority lies, of course, with the prophet, clearly, because of the nature of prophecy. But after the prophet, and remember that one of the fundamental problems here is that there was no